what's the real cost of living in Portugal? Let's talk about all the hidden costs that you first think about once you have moved.
So we want to get into the detail and share with you some of the things that you definitely should be factoring in on your budgets before you decide to take the leap and move to Portugal.
Number 1. Health insurance. How does that even work in Portugal? So what you have to think about when you're buying health insurance is, first of all, there is so many different health insurance providers.
Yeah.
Medis, Allianz, and like 100 others. So really bear in mind into which of them you're picking, and also if you have any pre-existing conditions, then you need to think of that in advance. So most of them works with that they have a 3-tier program. They have a low range, mid-range, and a higher tier. And common for all of them is that they have quite significant co-payments.
And the other thing to say is that there are brokers out there who are willing to help you find the right insurance for your personal circumstances. So if you'd feel more comfortable in providing a broker with your specifications and letting them go out and do the work for you, then that is also an option.
So with co-payments, you have to expect that the minimum, if you want to see one doctor, will be like 17 euros in co-payments, at least with our insurance. And then sometimes you'll find things that are not covered or only partially covered, and then the cost will be much higher. So bear that in mind. Even if you have health insurance, it can quickly add up. And sometimes if you need to have several things done on the same visit, that can quickly add up as well. You're not just covered under the initial 17 euros.
And some of the other things to think about is definitely read the fine print, because there are things that you'll be covered for straight away, and there will be other things that will attract a grace period. So there'll be some things you'll need to wait 6 months for, some things you'll need to wait 12 months for. Our coverage still attracts a discount. So if we want a procedure that we're still in the grace period for, we can still get discounted fees for some hospitals. Another important thing is to check with those hospitals that are closest to you, those hospitals that you, if you've got a condition or a hospital that's closest to you, do go on their website. On all the websites, it tells you who their partnerships are with. So you'll be able to see the extensive list of hospitals and providers that work with each of the respective hospitals.
Another thing to bear in mind is that when you do have found a doctor, sometimes they work multiple places. So maybe you want to book an appointment with this doctor, you try to book an appointment with them, and they might be able to see you like next week, very soon. But then that might not be covered under the insurance, because maybe they're seeing you in their private clinic and not through the hospital. And if you're trying to book through the hospital, then maybe you have to wait 6 or 7 months for an appointment. And what happens there is that an appointment typically costs more or less 100 euros. And the medical insurance does cover part of that. It usually cover like 30-35% of the bill, but you do have to do the outlay initially, and then you get the reimbursement for the 30-35%.
And it's not always that this private doctor will tell you that they actually work at a hospital where you could get the rates cheaper. So just bear that in mind. I only found out by chance that a particular doctor that I went to see actually worked in one of the local hospitals, and I was quite surprised to find that out later on. But then when I called the hospital to try and get an appointment with this specific doctor, her availability was booked out for the next 6 months. But if I just saw her in her own private practice, I could literally get an appointment the following week.
So let's talk about the dental insurance. So dental insurance is usually not under the traditional health insurance. It's usually as a separate add-on. We have our dental insurance with a separate provider from the health insurance. So what we have found out is that the dental insurance cost us, I think, around 120 euros per year, and we barely get any discounts on the actual treatments with the dentist. And the other thing is, it's nearly impossible to find out what would the price be if you didn't have dental insurance.
Yeah.
So what we have to compare it to is what would a similar treatment cost in London, for example, without any insurance, and then we roughly have an idea of that we were not getting that much out of it.
And on that point, I was quite surprised when on a recent trip to the dentist, at the end of it, the bill was quite high, despite having dental insurance. So again, just something to think about. Okay. Number 2, schools.
So if we just start out with this isn't, we're not going through everything, we're just going through what we are paying. So we have our kids in a private Portuguese school, so that's what we use as a basis here.
If we try to have a look here at schools, then the prices for crash, so that's up to 24 months, this is annual prices. So you can see it ranges in between 3,300 to 3,500 per year. And if you want to be paying that monthly, then the prices are roughly here. This is a specific school that we've borrowed a price list from. We're not going to show which school it is, but this is more or less the average that we are seeing for the Portuguese private schools that we have been speaking to. Then we have the lunch and snacks. Usually that costs around 150 euros a month. And if you do want to provide your own lunchbox, you usually have to pay 60 euros instead towards that whole lunchtime routine. Then in the other fees here, you do have things like sign-up fees, pre-inscriptions fees, which is usually like 100 to 200 euros per child. Then you have an annual registration fee, so that you have to pay every single year, even if your child keep going to the same school, which is in the region of around 275 euros, sometimes a little bit lower, sometimes a little bit higher. Then usually there is a school insurance that you have to pay every start of term. So you have to pay around 120 euros annually per child as well. And of course this varies, but this is just like to give you an idea of it. Then every sort of school starts, or every September, you get a long shopping list from the school about different things they need, papers, pencils, all kind of different materials that they need from the bookshop. So you do have to go down and buy for around, I think, between 150 to 200 euros per child. It can be quite costly, so it's worth just bearing in mind. Then if you do have more than one kids, then this is usually the sibling discount you can expect. Sometimes the discount won't go any higher than 15%, but it's roughly.
And then the last thing you have to think about once you've gone through these fees is the way that they're paid. So the Portuguese system here works that they normally have 14 pay slips. So they have an extra pay slip, I think, in December, and one extra pay slip around June. So how that normally works is that these expenses are spread out, so you pay an extra half a month in around November, December, and you pay extra half a month around June. And these two half payments are for covering July. So they're matching up with the typical payment scheme and the job market here.
The other thing to think about is school uniforms. And here we're going to give you an example of the costs of school uniforms. So the things to think about are, depending on if you have boys or girls, or, depending on the gender of your children, you'll need to think about t-shirts, potentially dresses, different seasons. So in the winter, for example, there may be trousers, a fleece, hooded sweatshirts, long sleeve tops. So there are many things. And then you have to think of sportswear, which could be t-shirts and shorts. Then you have to think about footwear, of course. And all of this so none of this is particularly inexpensive. So that does add to your bill, particularly when you think of how quickly children grow. So we're lucky with our two in the sense that they can share a bit of the uniform, but on the whole, we do have to keep up with very fast growing children. So that's just something to bear in mind as well. Other things that you might want to think about is extracurricular activities. So that could be swimming, football, basketball, cooking, and the whole gamut of activities that can be available in private schools, which is fantastic. But a cost that you will definitely have to think about. And this cost will obviously vary on duration. It will depend on if they're bringing someone external to come in and run that course. It might be a bit more expensive. What we found with some of the activities is they do run quite late into the evening as well. So that's just something, if your children, for example, are used to a set schedule back where you're from. I know for us it was a bit of an adjustment for our kids, because the school day finished extremely late, and often we weren't picking up one of our children until 20 to 7 in the evening. So that's just another side point that I wanted to share with you.
Number 3, food. I thought you were gonna go in.
Okay.
So generally, there's many reasonable price things in Portugal, but what we do notice is that we try to buy as much as we can in beer or organic, and that is quite costly here. And to be fair, it is also because in many supermarkets it's just started to be introduced. So there's many supermarkets that don't have a great range, that are just starting out with it, and that's why the prices can be a bit higher than what you are anticipating.
Outside of the regular supermarkets, there are specialist organic shops, but again, the prices of produce there is really quite costly, and so often what we try to do is split our shop between different local supermarkets and also specialist supermarkets, and generally we can get most things that we need.
So the one thing to think about is if you are looking for international products, you probably end up going to like Continental or Auchan, for example. So the trick is that only buy what's absolutely necessary from there. First of all, they don't always have the best selection of the most organic things. And second of all, many of their costs are quite high. So just bear that in mind when you're deciding how you're doing your weekly food shopping. Yeah, the other thing to mention is, for example, with Continental, you can sign up and get a Continental member card where you can save up some points. And if you do have, for example, a Galp as your gas and electricity provider, you get some different monthly vouchers from there as well towards your shopping with Continental.
Number 4, driving.
So in Portugal, as we have also covered in other videos, cars can be a bit costly, especially if you're choosing used cars. If you haven't already seen that video, go back to our 18 months in Portugal. Other than the cost of acquiring the car, the other things you have to think of is here that petrol is quite costly. Currently it's around €2 per litre.
On average.
Yeah. So between 1.90 and 2.10. So that's one thing to bear in mind, that it is quite high. And even before the oil crisis, it was still relatively high. It was still like €1.5, €1.6. So it have always been relatively high due to different taxes on the petrol and VAT. Positive thing is that cars in Portugal do last a long time. It's not abnormal that we see cars that are 30 years old that still run well, which is very surprisingly coming from a cold country like Denmark, where if a car is more than 8 years old, it's so rusty that it barely should be on the road. Maybe there's a few exceptions, but that's more or less how you think of cars in Denmark. Yeah. Last thing to think about when you are considering cars is that Portugal does have a lot of toll roads, and these toll roads does add up quite a bit. So for example, to drive from Lisbon to Algarve can be like 20-25 euros in toll, more or less, each way. To go from let's say Ericeira to Lisbon, which is a 40-minute journey, you spend around 25 minutes on the toll roads. That takes you around 5 euros. So it quickly adds up between 1 to 20 euros per time that you are meeting these toll bumps, and then that's when you have the roads around Lisbon. If you go further down to like Algarve, or you go further up towards Porto, you have these toll stops where you need the toll brick, where it automatically takes like between sometimes half €1 to €2 when you just drive under these toll stops, and those are also costs that quickly adds up that you just have to bear in mind.
The other thing to say is there are non-toll roads, but the journeys will take longer. And if you want to take the scenic route, then that works beautifully. But if you are, for example, commuting from outside of Lisbon into Lisbon to work, it's definitely something that you need to include on your budget when working out what your salary will be versus what your outgoings will be.
I think we should talk about airports for a second.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, every now and
They're
again.
bloody horses with wings.
Number 5, airports, I think. One thing to touch up upon, and this is also a post-COVID thing, so that might change and it might get better. But if we just look at how it has been the last year, sometimes, for example, to go to the UK, have been quite a few reasonable tickets we've been able to find. But going to like Denmark, where I'm from, it can easily be quite costly, and it's usually because it's only the Portuguese airline TAP Portugal that have the direct flights to there. So it's one thing to bear in mind that some countries can be quite costly, especially sometimes a year, like in some of the colder months when there's less people going back and forth. Which means that sometimes you have to spend a whole day trying to do a 3-hour flight journey with different stopovers. So it's just one thing to bear in mind, that if you are relying on airports, make sure that there's very good routes from wherever you're located to. We're relying on Lisbon Airport, and there have certainly been some dropouts that hopefully will disappear as we're getting on the other side of COVID, but it's worth mentioning.
And it's something that we absolutely need to factor into the budget, especially as you say in peak seasons. If we want to travel over the summer or during Christmas, then the costs are significantly higher, and it's just something that we factor into our budgets when we're thinking about our spend over the year.
Yeah.
So rather than taking a month by month spend, it's wise to look at your annual spend so you can make sure you don't miss these little costs that will sneak up on you and bite you on the bum.
And the other thing to bear in mind is the cost of these direct flight can be much higher when you have less availability. So, for example, a 3-hour journey to Copenhagen would normally cost return 100 to 200 euros pre-COVID, and that's can now be up to 500 euros for one ticket for one adult. So it's just one thing to bear in mind, that if you're relying to have to travel on a certain time and you don't have much flexibility, that can be an additional cost you need to think of. Number 6, miscellaneous.
So there are other costs that you might want to factor into your budget, and this is entirely variable depending on your lifestyle, but just some of the things that we thought are worth a mention at least are things like recreational costs. So activities that you'll do together or with the children at weekends and during holidays. Think about summer clubs for your children. Is that an extra cost, for example, during the school breaks? Think about clothes, what your budget will be typically for clothes, how often you would buy new clothes or need new clothes, especially again if you have children with them growing so quickly. That might be something that you'd want to think about. What are the other things? Gym membership, if you're looking to join a gym. So I had a gym membership. It was roughly 40 euros per month on the baseline. It didn't have a gym, so a gym without a gym, but it had a room for spinning, and it had a room for group fitness classes. So I used to go to attend group fitness classes, and I also had a personal trainer. And so all in all, it did add up once you included the cost of the trainer plus the baseline costs for the gym. It did add up to quite a bit, didn't it? So just make sure that you are factoring all of these into your budget.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Yeah, that works.
If you say it like that, then none of them are going to subscribe.